On prayer. It is said in the work that the universe can be taken as response to request. We offer up petition, and the universe in all its full and total reality, outer and inner, responds according to that request. With regard to our attention to this fact, many people are getting responses to requests which they do not understand they are making. If the universe, visible and invisible, material and psychological, gross and fine, as apprehended externally by our senses, and internally by the mind and heart, is response to request, then we can see how important it is to realize what kind of requests we are making. In order to understand why we get a particular response, from any side of life that we are actually perceiving. The work says, your being attracts your life, we should therefore see the connection. Without knowing it, a person may be making requests, and so getting a response from the total universe that they do not like. They see the response, but do not perceive what excites that response, what it is in themselves that attracts it. People, in other words, may be asking for trouble, without being aware that they are. They only see the outcome, the response. They see only effects and not causes. To think only from effects is one thing, it is how mechanical people think. To think from causes is quite another thing. Because it belongs to more conscious thinking. The level of our being enters into petition as much, or more than our knowledge. We may ask intellectually for happiness, but not see how factors that govern our being, such as love of our negative states, our grievances, our secret jealousies, our laziness, our dislikes and so on, are asking for something quite different, and that the universe is responding to these factors in our being, that we are secretly willing and affirming without seeing that we are. Understand that full request must contain both thought and will, formulation and emotional desire. The side of knowledge is the side of thought, and one can only think from their knowledge. The side of being wills, and a person only wills what they desire. So if we love negative states, then our will is of this quality and Maya's in it. Our love is our will, it will attract the response belonging to it. Only self-knowledge will make us aware of our state of being, and this begins with self-observation. Enough has been said on this subject, that a person may be getting responses they do not expect or desire, without seeing that they are attracting them, because they are making requests for something that they are not aware of. We can now therefore speak of some things said in this work, directly and indirectly about prayer. In the teaching of the work, the idea of prayer, and the idea of self-remembering, are so closely connected that the one cannot be separated from the other. Without self-remembering, prayer is impossible. So let's take a look at what this means, because a person, such as they are, cannot pray. Which means, in our ordinary daily state, we cannot pray. In order to pray we must be in a state of self-remembering. To pray as we are, in our ordinary state, is to pray in a state of sleep, and to pray in a state of sleep is useless. Nothing can happen, because such prayer cannot be answered, as it does not get anywhere. Let's recall therefore, what is said about states of consciousness in this work. 4 states of consciousness are possible, but ordinarily we all know and live in only 2, and both are called in the work, states of sleep. The first state of consciousness, or the lowest, is that of bodily sleep, which is a passive state in which a person lies in bed almost without movement, so as to rest and recuperate. In this state, an individual normally spends at least a third, or possibly more of their life. The second state of consciousness is the state in which people spend the remaining part of their lives, in which they move their limbs, walk or run about and talk, they write books, they take part in politics, and they kill one another. It is this state they regard as being active, calling it clear consciousness, or the waking state of consciousness. It is not too much to say that the terms clear consciousness, or waking state of consciousness, seem to have been given in jest, particularly when through our own self-observation, we begin to realize what clear consciousness ought in reality to be, and what the state in which a person lives and acts really is. For in this so-called waking state, someone is neither conscious of themselves, nor conscious of another. They live and they die in darkness. And it would be better for them in one way, if they simply remained passive in the first state of consciousness, for then, they could not move about and kill their neighbor. The third state of consciousness is self-remembering, or self-consciousness. The state of self-awareness. It is usual to consider that we have this state already, and are always aware of ourselves, that we act, think and feel with full consciousness of what we are doing. However, Western science has overlooked the fact that we do not possess this state of consciousness. And we cannot create it in ourselves through immediate desire alone, or decide that we will henceforth always live in a state of self-consciousness, which is pure fantasy. This third state constitutes the natural right of man, such as we are, and if we do not possess it, it is because of the wrong conditions of our life. Today this state of consciousness occurs only in the form of rare flashes, and it is only through long practice, through trial and error, that we can begin to re-establish a state of self-remembering in ourselves. Help can only reach to the third state of consciousness. It cannot permeate down to the darkness that people live their daily lives in, and in which we are so often content to exist. To pray, therefore, from a state of sleep, to pray from our so-called waking state, is like dreaming that one is praying. For in this second state of consciousness, we are also dreaming, and everything is unreal, only we do not notice that we are doing everything in a dream, unless we experience a moment of consciousness, belonging to the third and fourth states of consciousness, and are then able to see the contrast. Which usually happens only in moments of heightened emotion, in shock, such as near-death encounters, terror, deep emotional trauma or absolute terror. When we see our lives, so to speak, flash before us. When someone prays, therefore, they must remember themselves. They must be conscious of themselves, and of what they are praying for. They must feel the meaning of everything that they say, and actually feel themselves saying it. They must feel it is really I in them that prays, and not a set of frightened little eyes or a set of mechanical eyes, formed through habit. Then finally we can neither pray nor remember ourselves unless we feel there is both a higher state of ourselves existing, and something higher than we are. We can now consider the fourth state of consciousness, with regard to a class of praying that could be referred to as praying for enlightenment. When someone prays for enlightenment, they pray that they might see things, such as they truly are, apart from their imagination and their subjective worldview. In the religions of all nations, there are indications of the possibility of such a state of consciousness, which is called enlightenment, and various other names, but which cannot be described in words, for it transcends all language. Hence, when an individual prays for enlightenment, they pray for objective consciousness. But we must first be in the third state of consciousness, for it is only this third state that can be touched, and can retain the meaning of any experience, or help, as it comes from those who are at the level of the fourth state of consciousness. So we must realize that if an individual prays for enlightenment, with regard to themselves, that they are praying to awaken, and if such a person fully awakens to themselves, then sees themselves such as they really are, then they are praying for understanding. This of course is useless, if we make no effort to understand better for ourselves, what we truly are. For if a person in this work works neither on the line of knowledge, nor the line of being, and simply petitions for deeper understanding, then their view of the universe is very naive. They must realize the harshness of things, and the price that must be paid, then get rid of all childish and sentimental views through personal sacrifice. For to pray for something that we should work for, and can if we try, obtain for ourselves, is quite idle. But people take idle views, and cannot wake up to their own danger. We must fight for the work, and fight to keep it, because we will not keep it unless we jump and catch hold of its rope, then insist upon holding on to it. The next thing that the work says of prayer, is that all three centers in a person must pray. To begin with, if only the mind prays, and the heart does not, there can be no response. The whole person must pray, and the whole person is first of all three siblings that do not agree. If these three centers, in the three-story house that we represent, worked in harmony, then we would already find ourselves in the third state of consciousness. We need to be sufficiently awake to receive help, to obtain a response to our requests. However, these three siblings in us do not cooperate, which particularly today is the case. For this reason, we can glance briefly at some of the teaching given in the work, about the state of our centers in this modern age. We know, for example, that the study of the multiplicity of our being, which characterizes our level of being, begins with the observation of centers. That three centers work independently, owing to the abnormal conditions of the 21st century, which produce one-sided development. Every conscious perception, and every manifestation of a person, everything taken in, and everything given out, should be the result of the coordinated work of our three centers, each of which should furnish its own share of associations and knowledge, its own particular and personal experience. In place of this, however, The working of these different centers is almost entirely disconnected. In consequence of this, the intellectual, emotional and instinct moving centers do not cooperate with one another, and so correct and complement one another, but, as it were, travel along different roads which rarely meet. For this reason we are very rarely conscious, and again, for the same reason, we are to begin with, not one individual, but three distinct people, that are not in harmony and do not act in unison. The first thinks in total isolation from the rest, the second feels in the same way, and the third acts mechanically, according to long-established routines and habits, well trodden through constant repetition. If development were normal, then these three siblings in us, the intellectual, the emotional and the instinct moving, would form one single being, in harmony with all the different sides of themselves. But as it is, we are, in ourselves, in a condition of disharmony. We are first of all three siblings who rarely agree on anything, and who indeed spend their time in frustrating one another, quarreling with one another and each dominating the other in turn. Any general result of their combined action, in which each of them is in agreement, and each signs their name so to speak, in agreement, is thus very rare, but when this does happen, the host is, in that moment, in another state of consciousness. They are in fact, conscious, in the sense of the work teaching, for they are in simultaneous possession of all of their faculties, and conscious in that moment of each. Their consciousness embraces all of the centers at the same time, instead of being confined to one or another center, or to some small part of it at a time. This extension, or expansion of consciousness, to include at the same time all the centers, is not supernormal, but is actually what a normal person should possess. This is the third state of consciousness, the state of self-remembering or self-awareness, which is everyone's birthright, but which we lose very soon, owing to the effect of the sleeping people with whom we are surrounded. It is through wrong influences, wrong education, and the wrong conditions of modern life that we have fallen away from this state of consciousness, which is our natural right, and which, if we possessed it, would make it impossible for us to act as we do today. We can now look at one or two things that the work says, which indirectly bear on the subject of prayer. The work says that in the Lord's Prayer, as in the parables and sayings of the Gospels, there is meaning within meaning. This is why it is said in this work, that the Gospels are a test for someone's level of understanding, and that as we change, then so do the Gospels for us. In the Lord's Prayer, there are innumerable ideas. Each phrase has inner octaves. There are so many things in it to an individual who has formed the ideas of the work in their mind, that to speak fully about the Lord's Prayer, for example, is to speak about every side, and every aspect of the work itself. To read the prayer at various times, and then to think of all of its connections, beginning with the octave from the divine intelligence of the Son, in which man is created, and of all the work says of mankind, and of our inner state, what it is that we must do to awaken, is to use the prayer in its full sense. To repeat the words mechanically is utterly useless. Reference can here be made to one of the sayings of Christ, quoted previously on prayer, where it was said that a man must pray for a thing, and have faith that he has it, then he will get it. All things whatsoever ye pray for and ask for, have faith that ye have received them, and ye shall have them. Mark, chapter 11, verse 24. For it is said in the work that we must not wait until we have the force to do something, but act, if it is indeed our aim, as if we had it already, and then we will attract it. To wait until we have the strength and understanding to do something, with regard to the work, makes it impossible to do anything. But we must each reflect on this for ourselves. To add, in closing, a few things more. All prayer from self-pity is of course useless. Prayer for others is only possible through an understanding of their difficulties, a shared experience, and so through understanding yourself, you understand others, but only in as far as you understand yourself. All work is therefore the preparation of lower centers, for the reception of influences coming from higher centers. We have two centers fully developed in us, that belong to higher levels of intelligence. But though they are working all the time, we cannot hear them. Their influences touch our state of self-remembering, but go no further. Therefore all work is prayer, for all real prayer is practice, to connect us with heaven, the seventh dimension, which is the complete absence of any negativity, any resistance, where all work on oneself, is to purify lower centers and make right order in our mind, in our conscious awareness, through being taught right knowledge. so that the influences of higher centers can be heard and felt in us, deeply. We can thus speak of different sorts of prayer. 1. Prayer for enlightenment or understanding. 2. Prayer about temptation. 3. Prayer about oneself, and about others. With regard to the second form, prayer about temptation, this refers to temptation about the work. It is not necessarily answered, because the work will answer, if we struggle with ourselves to hold to its teaching, and apply that to ourselves, then actually use it, through regular and constant practice. Remember what temptation in the work is, and why it is necessary, in order to bring about change in us, then it follows that if we pray in this regard, our prayers will not be answered, but if we work on ourselves instead, then we will get a response. As noted, to pray when we should instead be working, to expect help, when we should make effort, is idle. With regard to prayer about oneself, it must be about others first, and oneself last. Remember, there are 3 levels of work. Work for the work in and of itself, work with others, and work on oneself. So to pray only for oneself, to work only with regard to oneself, and those connected through self-interest with us, cannot yield any result. 3 forces must enter prayer, and this is difficult to speak of at this stage, but we will find answers in the Lord's Prayer, if we reflect long enough upon it.